Welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. And I am delighted to bring you this week's guest. I have with me award-winning journalist and author of Writing That Gets Noticed. This book is amazing. I have Estelle Erasmus with me. And Estelle, thank you for joining the Empowered Half Hour.
Thank you so much, Becca, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I've listened to your show and I'm a real fan of what you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm a fan of yours too. So I have been reading her book, Writing That Gets Noticed. And there are so many things in here that I want to talk about during the interview here. But can you share with the listeners a little bit about your background and what prompted you to write this book?
Well, Becca, I was a magazine editor-in-chief in the 90s up till the early aughts. And I was there during the glory days of magazines. I mean, I worked really hard, but I moved myself up in my career until I was the editor-in-chief of 5 national consumer publications, including launching publications for publishers such as Hachette and working at Woman's World, which is where I got my start in the beauty department. And so I moved up. And then what happened was in midlife, I met the man who would become my husband. I was dealing with infertility. There were changes in the industry when print was going to digital. And so I pivoted into medical education for 7 years. And it's really interesting because I didn't think I'd ever get back into magazines where I used to be on television regularly, talking about the magazines, being a spokesperson, and writing very journalistic articles that included the need for research and finding like service tips. So my voice wasn't really a part of anything that I did. So I left, I pivoted, I went to medical education. I met the man who would become my husband and got married to him in midlife in my 40s. And then I never thought I wanted to have a child. I decided he would make such a great dad that I wanted to be a mother. And motherhood was a whole new world for me.
Sure.
And leaving behind my title and who I was a whole big segue for me as well. And I became somebody that I didn't think I'd ever be. Somebody who was kind of okay being part of a group I never wanted to be, which was the Club of Motherhood. I didn't think I fit in. I just kind of looked at them as very ordinary people. And what I realized is motherhood was such a profound, transformative moment in my life that I wanted to write about it in a way that I'd never before done. The whole thing was I had left a group of, I guess, a genre or a group or publishing in a way that I didn't think anyone cared who I was anymore because it was past 7 years when my last accomplishments in publishing had been. And I wanted to get back into the spotlight. One of my things is I don't think there's any shame in ambition.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, we grew up thinking, oh my God, you're ambitious. Like somebody once said to me, you're so ambitious. It was the worst insult.
I've been told that too.
I like that solidarity. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with ambition. In fact, the Oxford Dictionary says ambition is being productive. It's producing something that you're proud of in the world and moving forward with that to enhance your life and the life of others. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but you know, the idea is there's nothing wrong with that. And so I wanted to get back in the spotlight, but I had no idea how to do it. And so as kind of my life is a little bit of a serendipitous situation, and somebody in one of these moms groups had told me about a show called Listen to Your Mother. And I kind of knew about the show, but I didn't know that there was something that I could do for it. And then I realized that I had written a personal essay when my daughter was at a reading group in the library. And everybody was sitting in the circle being told to be a good girl, be a good boy, just like society tells us to
Yes.
do.
Yes.
Don't color outside the lines, don't go outside the box. And so everybody was sitting very nicely with their parents. And my daughter got up, moved into the circle, and began to dance.
I remember reading that. I was like, I love her spirit.
And I just thought, could I ever be like that again? Could I be so free with my possibilities
Oh,
of
wow.
life? And
Mhm.
I wrote about it. And that was the essay that I decided to use to audition for Listen to Your Mother, which took
Nice.
me into a whole new world. And everything was new for me. That's the other thing. Don't be afraid when something is new. A lot of people just think they're going to stay. If I had been like, I am the
Stay in your
editor in
comfort
chief,
zone. Yeah.
right? If I had thought to myself, I'm the editor in chief and that's all I am and that's all ever I'm going to be. And if I can't go back to being the editor in chief, I'm nothing. That would have been a huge mistake. And that's
Mhm.
part of what I tell my students. You can't identify by a title. You are the sum total of your skill sets.
I love that you're sharing that. And I just want to pause for the listeners because we do have a lot of ambitious folks on here, maybe like emerging thought leaders. I mean, there's a whole profile of people that listen to the show. But I think that's so important that you're a sum of everything. And I want to call out the women specific. And I would love for you to like elaborate on this a little bit because I see that women start over. They don't take their skills with them. They were in your situation. Many women, maybe even including myself, would be like, oh, everything I learned no longer matters. Like I have to start from scratch. And I have learned in my professional career too that I am a sum. And now, as I stand up as a writer and a speaker and a thought leader, I'm a sum of everything I've learned. And it took me a while to feel confident in bringing that forward. So I just thought that was a really good stopping point to like call out to the listeners, hey, you're a sum. I want you to take that with you. And then, Estelle, I would love for you to maybe like talk a little bit more about that and then continue with your story.
Yes, back then, that wasn't the popular thought pattern. Like people
Mm-hmm.
didn't think, oh, that's what you need to do. So I sort of needed to figure this out for myself. And we're all energy, right? We're
Yes.
energy. I mean, my publisher is New World Library, which is
Yes.
the publisher of books that transform, that change your lives. And in my book, I talk about the wonderful synchronicity of ending up with that publisher. And I don't believe that was an accident. It was meant to be.
So,
And
Estelle, I don't know if you know this, not to interrupt, but I recently got signed with New World too. And I will be coming out with my book in fall 2024.
oh
And
my,
it was very serendipitous. Like it just happened. And I believe too that I was led to New World. And I hope to write about my little New World story too.
I love that, Becca. Oh, that's wonderful.
Mhm. Thank
Congratulations. They're
you.
a fabulous publisher. I've had a fantastic time
That's
working with
great.
all of them. So we'll talk offline, but I'm very happy for you.
Thank you.
So back to the sum total of parts. I think that we sell ourselves short in
Mm,
so many ways. And I had to really separate who I was and what I wanted. I knew I was ambitious. I knew I wanted to go places and make an impact on the world, on people, on myself, and
yes.
now on my daughter. And so she was sort of like she became my muse. Before
Mm,
that, my muse was maybe ambition, or maybe my muse was getting into different venues or places in terms of publishing. But my daughter now became a deeper reason for me
sure.
to want to share what I've learned, my midlife wisdom, I call it. And so through Listen to Your Mother, I learned about the world of blogging, which I'd
Mm,
never known about. And that was back in 2011, 2012, when blogging was a few years old. It was really, I think it started maybe 2006, 2007. And what happened was I was with all these fascinating women and Listen to Your Mother,
hmm
and they were talking about blogging. And I said, what is this blogging? Who pays you? Do you get paid? Because that was my mindset, traditional
Sure.
publishing. And they said, oh, no, nobody pays us. But sometimes we're influencers and we get paid by companies. And I said, this is interesting. And they said, oh, yeah, we have a big community and we follow each other and we go to blog her. And I said, how do I get in that? And they said, you just have to start a blog. And so
That's
I
so cool.
taught myself, I figured out, I did the research because one of the things being a journalist is you know how to do research. So whether it's I'm researching motherhood or a new venue or something I want to do, I learned which WordPress site to use, which was wordpress.org, because then you could monetize it at some point.
Ooh,
And with
nice.
WordPress.com, you cannot. At least back in the day, you couldn't when I got it. And then I taught myself till 3 a.m. I remember crying because I couldn't figure it out. And my husband was like, what are you doing? Go to bed. And I said, I'm trying to do this blogging thing. You never know. I always say, you never know when your bad luck's your good luck. And let me explain that a little bit more. It's when you think that something is to your detriment. And here's a very basic example. You're running late for a plane and you miss the plane and you're devastated because you wanted to go on this flight, and I would say, poo, 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 something happens to the flight. The people
Right.
who tried to go to the Lockerbie, Scotland, there were a few of them that couldn't make the flight because something happened. And so you just never know. And even when, I mean, I'm kind of digressing, but back in the day when I was dating before my husband, I was talking to someone online and he said, oh, let's meet up after work. And I said, okay, great. And he called me from a cell phone. And I don't think a lot of people knew that day to write down, like when the cell phone number came through, I wrote down the number. He didn't know how to block it or whatever. And he was late and I was late. And I think what happened was I was running late. I was supposed to meet him. And so I called his phone and his wife answered.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, well, I was
Guess we're
supposed
not
to
going
meet
on
your
that
husband for a
date.
date and I'm going to go now. So that's an example of you never know when your bad luck's good luck. So struggling to figure out getting back into publishing, but going into blogging, the bloggers were the ones who were very early with social media. They
Yes, I remember
knew
that
what
too.
to do. They were on Facebook. They were on early Twitter. So by the time when I was in publishing already, by the time the rest of publishing caught up, I already had 15,000 followers on all the different sites because the bloggers brought me along. So
Right.
you know what I mean? And there's a lot more, but I want to
Yeah.
let you
Well,
lead.
yeah, yeah,
from,
yeah. No, I love so much of what you shared. And one of the things that I took away from your book that I didn't know that I would is just by the title, I wasn't sure. I invited you on. I reached out to New World to bring you on because I saw the title of the book, and I have so many people in the audience here as the listeners that love to write. And so I was like, hey, I want to have you on so you could talk about writing like you just have. And what I found out is that because you're a journalist, you talk so much more about writing beyond a book. Again, like blogging and articles and essays. And I just thought that was such a relief in a way because most of the books that I've gotten my hands on that have a title like writing that gets noticed and get published type of thing are really just about a book. So I just want to compliment you on going into the whole world of writing because I appreciated that as a reader.
Thank you. And Becca, here's my whole philosophy of teaching, which is another reason that I wrote the book. I didn't want people, I mean, I sort of struggled to get back into the world of publishing, and I did it, but it took a lot. And if I'd had a book like my book, that would have helped me so much to learn how to craft your words to get an editor's attention, to learn how to create the arc of a story, to learn. I mean, now people are getting ghosted by editors left, right, and center. But little
Yes.
tips that I share in the book, if you can write a compelling headline with an emotion in it, like I wrote How to Bully Proof Your Child for the New York Times that went viral. And that was my headline. in the body of the subject line. And when it went to the editor, she didn't see pitch from journalist. She saw pitch on from
Yes.
journalist. And that was what she responded to.
Wow.
And so my philosophy of teaching is you give a person a fish, you feed them for the night.
Yes.
You teach them how to fish, they can feed themselves for the rest of their lives.
I
And
love that.
that's what I want to do. And that's what I do for my students.
That's so great. And again, I just love where you went with that. And there was a note that I took is more like on the spiritual side, but I think it's really important for creatives and it's something that I do, but I was like, "Oh my God, she wrote about it." So like I get so many of my creative ideas in the shower. And you wrote that. I was like, "Oh my God, someone else does too." But I love that you shared, I think it was 13 tips to get into your creative juices. I'll turn it over to you, but I wanted to share that with you because it really
I'm so
resonated.
glad that you said that. And it is, there are things that happen that you don't even know how it happens. And so for me in the book, I made sure to include the science of why something is happening, the
That.
research in a very reader friendly way, why that happens, what water does to soothe the neurons, to make you in a beta state, to help these ideas come. Repetitive motion. I find that when I want to just kind of let my mind go, I just do things like, I don't know, if I have a mailing to go out for like a party, I'll stick the
Yep.
envelopes or go through a list and check off what I need to do. Just anything methodical, I find really does help the mind. And I included that. And of course, exercise when the endorphins. And for me, my favorite tip that I include is watching bad reality TV.
Let your mind relax.
And they come up with new studies for that every day.
That's
Like they
funny.
show if you have any issues in your life, and who doesn't, right? We're always struggling with something. That seeing people struggle with even bigger problems kind of makes us feel okay, it's not that bad. I can watch that and then just go into escapism and then go back to my life, what I'm dealing with.
I never really thought about that. That's really interesting. I'm like, I might have to pop on some more reality TV then. So
Totally.
let me ask you another question. All right, so you talked a little bit about the background of why you wrote it, and within that, you shared a little bit of what you've had to overcome. But I'd love for you to share right now that the book's published and that you're talking about it, what's like a current lesson or a aha that is up for you right now?
I would say never accept someone else's reality as your
I
own.
love that. Can you say that again?
Never accept someone else's reality as your own.
That's so fabulous.
You have to be an independent thinker and you're not going to be a sheep, right? So if
That's
everybody
right.
said, I mean, people, there was a study, it was now made defunct or said it was something wrong that said that a woman in her 40s had as much chance of getting married as like she has more greater chance of being shot by a terrorist than getting married. And it was just debunked. That's my word I was looking for. It was
Yes.
debunked. And if you listen to what you think you're being told, you shouldn't have a baby and you know what I mean? It's been the best thing ever.
Yes. Yes.
And so when people said things like, oh, it's very hard to get into the New York Times. Well, I've been into the New York Times like almost a dozen times. I've been in different
Mm-hmm.
sections. And so you can't listen and you can't accept when somebody tells you no. For me, no is just another way of saying, find another angle, find another way in. My husband says, where other people see boundaries, I see none. And I think that's what makes me a good teacher for my students because I get so many people, Becca, who are dejected. They might have published well 5 years ago, right? They might have published well. They might have had a traditional career in magazines
Mm-hmm.
and now they feel dejected. And I say, no,
Love that.
still reach for the top. Send it to the New York Times. I had a student, Emily P. Erickson, who was like, I have this idea, but maybe I should put it on Medium. And I said, no, pitch this to the New York Times. And, I helped her with the title. I guided her with the process. I said, It has, I think it was emotional cushioning. It has an interesting kind of buzzy vernacular. I said, and it got into the New York Times. So there
That's
are
awesome.
ways to make sure that you're listening to your own internal monitor. And if you don't have a good one, find somebody like me who does.
That's right. Especially if you're in the market too, right? Like go see Estelle because I have to say too that not listening to the outside forces like was really beneficial for me in getting a traditional publishing contract with New World because I had
Yes.
published my first book and I was working on the proposal for my second book and I knew it was good. And everyone kept telling me it's so hard to get a traditional publisher. You're not going to be able to do it. I don't have 100,000 followers on social media. And I just had to get tunnel vision and follow the signs and follow my instinct and my intuition. And I just kept going, kept going. I created my own world and I got to see one of my childhood dreams come fulfilled. I used to, this is really funny, but as like a young girl, I used to write like short stories and then set my stuffed animals up and like
I love that.
give them the show and read them my stories and like keynote to them, which is really hilarious. But to see one of your childhood dreams come true because you just kept going and you didn't listen to the outside noise is a fantastic feeling. And I love that you shared that because for the listeners, one of my things is like never stop dreaming, never stop going for it. You absolutely can accomplish the thing that you want to do.
And there's always a way in. Like I have students who maybe they haven't gotten an article in the New York Times, but they've gotten a tiny love story. And then sometimes they're asked to be on the podcast or they're asked to have, or they have their tiny love story in
Yes.
the calendar. I mean, there's so many places. And then that's something you can take an agent and say, I've written a tiny love story. It's a part of my memoir in progress. I mean, there's a lot of ways to move the needle forward.
That's awesome. So it oozes out of you, but I want to ask the question more directly. Why are you passionate about this topic?
I love that question, Becca. I'm passionate about storytelling. My whole
Hmm.
life is about storytelling. My good friends know when we get together at a party, they're ready for Estelle to tell the stories, how she was humiliated, whether on vacation, when a masseuse. I have these funny stories about getting a massage with my husband. And one masseuse is kind of Quasimodo, and the other is this beautiful girl. And I said I'd like help with lymphatic drainage. I was supposed to have the beautiful
Yes,
girl, my husband have the other one. And the woman said, "Oh, well, that's her specialty," and did the beans. Makes a funny story. But I tell my stories whether they're painful, like when I had an ectopic pregnancy
oh,
and
yes.
I had to let go of the baby, but the baby had been talking to me kind of spiritually. And I write about when I had postpartum depression, and I wrote a lot of parenting pieces. My daughter's now 14. She's a
Aw,
teenager.
that's
Not
cool.
doing that so much anymore, but I've written about my husband a little bit. He doesn't love it, but I go over with him. Like I wrote a positive one for the Washington Post. My husband does the laundry when he
That's
should.
awesome.
And I included studies showing why it's helpful for girls. So I write my stories. I encourage my students to write their stories, but in a way that's not going to harm them. I have seen situations where people have written about how they had an affair with somebody and then they got married to that person and ruined another family. And that has only created heartache for them.
Sure.
Or somebody who said they broke the law and this is what they did. And yeah, they get a wonderful clip and they've only had problems with the IRS, with their ex husband, with all sorts of issues. There's a book out now about mom rage, and the person writing it is the right person who wrote it. She wrote it for the New York Times. I had a student who wanted to write about it, but she was in the middle, she was about to get a divorce, and
The
we
right
both talked
perspective.
about it.
Yeah.
That would not have been a good. So you have to really realize that people may want your stories, but you have to protect how you are portraying them and what you are sharing.
I love that so
And I'm
much.
passionate about that.
I
Yes.
can tell. I can tell. I love it. And I can't believe we're almost at the bottom of the 30 minutes already. So, what I'd like to ask next is how can someone take writing and use it as a way to empower their life?
There's so many people that want to use writing in so many different ways. I talk to retirees who want to write their legacy life story. They don't care if they get published, they just want it for their family. And that's just as important as wanting to go a traditional publishing route. There are people who absolutely want to break into big publications, and I help them with that, how to craft that. There are people who are just starting in the industry and they want to understand, how do they get their first clips? And how do they move from their first clips to their second and branding themselves in a way that they're going to show their voice and not just be whatever the guidelines are of the publication? Because that's how you get noticed. You could recognize, I studied voice, I studied music and opera. And when anybody sings, that's a star. Barbara Streisand, Rihanna. You only need to hear the first note, Kelly
I
Clarkson.
read that in your book and I was like, right on, sister.
It's the same thing with writing, but you have to make sure you get your voice in there. And I teach them how to do that.
Now that we are down at the bottom, I want to make sure there's enough time for you to share how the listeners can follow you, find more about either working with you, your book, etc. So, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Becca. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I did get so
Same.
passionate about the topic. So you can find me everywhere on social media, and that includes TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, Threads, and Blue Sky at Estelle S. Erasmus. And that's also my website, estelleserasmus.com. I also have a Substack, which is writing that gets noticed. And so I give pitching opportunities, and I shared an interview with a New York Times editor, and I'm doing a lot more with that. If you sign up for my website with it by, I guess, next week, I will make sure to send you my 10 best writing tips. And I will also put you in a drawing to receive a free half-hour consultation with me,
Yay!
special to your
I love
listeners.
that. Thank you for doing that.
My
And
pleasure.
we'll
And
include all the links in the show notes too, guys, so you can just click and find your way to Estelle.
beautiful. And Writing That Gets Noticed is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, IndieBound, Bookshop, everywhere books are sold.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was awesome to interview you.
It was so great speaking with you, Becca. Thank you.